Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming to the third installment of our advocacy series webinar on navigating the child welfare system. Today we have three presenters who are Bronwyn, Nicole, and Sophia from the Office of the Representative for Children and Youth. And they're going to be talking to us about navigating the child welfare system. And with that, I will pass it off to Nicole, who's our first presenter.
Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much to the folks at the Foundry for inviting us to speak about advocacy in child welfare and our work at the Representative for Children and Youth. Next slide, please. Thank you. As a way to start, we wish to acknowledge that we are living and working with gratitude and respect on the unceded ancestral territories of the Indigenous peoples of BC. My name's Nicole. I'm Saulteaux Métis on my mom's side and English on my dad's side. I'm the Junior Communications Officer here at RCY, and I'm grateful to be speaking to you from the territories of the Lekwungen peoples and the Songhees, Esquimalt, and Wasanich peoples whose relationship with this land continue to this day.
Hi there, my name is Sophia Montero, excuse me, and I'm a manager at the RCY working primarily in community and youth engagement. I'm a person of color and a guest on the traditional and unceded territories of the Tsleil-Waututh, Squamish, and Musqueam First Nations.
And hello, my name is Bronwyn. I'm a manager of advocacy with the Representative for Children and Youth, and I'm phoning in today from the ancestral territories of the Squamish, Tsleil-Waututh, and Musqueam peoples. I go by she and her as preferred pronouns, and I really appreciate this opportunity to speak with you all today.
So today we're going to cover what is the Representative for Children and Youth. We're also going to talk about rights and advocacy, practical tips for effective advocacy. We're going to give you a case scenario, a Q&A, and how to contact us.
So what's the Representative for Children and Youth? The RCY is a provincial organization, and we provide support services to children and youth so that to ensure that they're treated fairly when accessing certain or designated government services. We make sure that their voices are heard and their views are considered when decisions are being made about their lives. It's important to note that we're not MCFD, but we oversee what they do. So our office can help young people requesting or receiving services, receiving any of the following government's funded services. So we can help with family support services, such as having access to support workers and parenting classes and mediation. We could help with child protection, young people who are living outside of their parents' homes, such as foster care or group homes, or living with an extended family or friends. We can help with mental health and addiction services for people under 19, adoptions and guardianship, services for children and youth with disabilities, young youth justice and probation. So we make sure that young people who are in custody, we make sure that their rights while in custody is respected, and services for youth and young adults during their transition to adulthood. So in addition to providing services for children and youth 0 to 19, we also have a small, like a narrow services for young people ages 19 to 24 who received MCFD services prior to turning 19. So for them, we could provide advocacy to those seeking services from Community Living BC, which is an organization that supports adults with developmental disabilities, or young people who are wanting to access agreements with young adults or the tuition waiver program for post-secondary education. So what is advocacy? So advocacy has two parts. The first part is speaking up. So advocacy is about speaking up with the hope that your view or the view of those who you're advocating for will be heard and considered by decision makers. Speaking up for yourself can be very difficult. Some people, for very good reasons, are afraid to speak up because they believe, things would get worse if they do. And I know for myself, there's been times where I've spoken up and it felt like nothing really changed. So it could be very disempowering and discouraging to speak up sometimes. So on the flip side, though, I can also think of times when speaking up can feel really great. It could feel very valid. validating to get your opinions heard and considered. And while you may not always get what you want, you would learn a ton about the process and gain the confidence to advocate for yourself a bit better next time, and to speak up for yourself in more situations in the future. Speaking up requires courage, persistence, and belief that what you have to say is important. The second part of advocacy is being heard. And it's not just about being heard, it's being heard by the right decision makers. You can be heard by friends and family and support systems, and they could be a great source of support, emotional and moral support for you. But if they're not the right, but you need the right decision makers to hear you so that you can possibly get decisions changed. So that involves having effective communication skills. It means being respectful, being able to stay calm, which can be really difficult because it's your life, it's your situation. So that can be really hard to stay calm in those situations. And it also involves being able to listen to what others have to say. It also means being able to clearly identify an issue and how it affects you, and having the flexibility and creativity to offer, excuse me, possible solutions. Lastly, advocacy is a process. So in most cases, the advocacy process will take time. And depending on the situation, there may be multiple meetings and follow-ups to get to a place where you understand what's going on and you're being heard by decision makers. So at the RCY, an advocacy file can last, it could be as quick as an email or a phone call, and it'll be resolved quite quickly. And but other files, depending on the complexity of the concern, can take much longer. So, we have advocacy here as like a two-step process of speaking up and being heard. But and it may seem really straightforward, but it can be really hard, and there are lots of barriers and benefits to advocacy. So here we've listed some of the barriers and benefits. So as a barrier, many people don't challenge decisions or make complaints about decisions affecting their lives or the lives of their loved ones. For very good reason. They might be afraid that they'll get in trouble, or maybe, speaking up, it might be too complicated, or they might feel like, their efforts won't make a difference. Negative past experiences can also make you feel powerless or unheard. And sometimes, individuals, especially children and youth, it is disempowering to be dealing with such huge systems. It can be de-energizing and overwhelming. Also, if you are a person of color, so on the slide it says society benefits some people over others. So if you're someone of color or identify as queer, you're an English language learner, or belong to another group which has been ignored or faces discrimination, it could even be harder to be unheard. And finally, the lack of knowledge on how. The system is big and can be overwhelming. So it's really, and you might feel like you're alone in trying to navigate it, but what's important is you look for supports that can help you navigate through those systems. So it could be a support worker, maybe someone from the Foundry, or maybe someone from the RCY that can help you navigate through those systems and help you advocate for yourself. So those are some of the barriers. The benefits is you have a say in things that impact your life. Like nothing should be happening about your life and you have no idea why or what's going on. So by advocating and speaking up for yourself, you're contributing to the conversation, and you have a say in your life. You might get all of what you've asked for, and sometimes you do. Other times you might get some of it and not all. So the benefits might not be directly towards you. The benefits might be more towards like others in your situation, or it could benefit yourself, if you're in the same situation in the future. So it's the benefits could be helping yourself, and it could be helping others. It could be also improving your communication skills and advocacy skills. And after going through one process, then you're much more knowledgeable and much more equipped to go through a process in the same process in the future, or similar processes. So yeah, so it's all about making sure that you're building your knowledge base in addition to helping yourself or others.
So we generally start at the RCY with rights. So all people have rights, which are legally protected. You may have heard of things like the Charter of Rights and Freedoms or human rights codes. These are what we refer to as legally protected rights. When we speak to little people or young people about rights, we tend to start with that they're basic statements that everyone needs to live a life of dignity and to reach potential that they wish to reach. So we start with the 4 Bs, which are your right to be safe, your right to be heard, your right to be yourself, and your right to be healthy. Often these rights are found in larger documents, like over here we have the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child, the UN Declaration on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, and the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. Those are very large documents, and so we break them down into basically those 4 Bs. What everybody should know is that you're born with rights. You don't have to earn them. They are part of what you need to feel valued. And so specifically for young people who are in care or residing outside of their family home and have a social worker who might be their legal guardian, we refer to this as being youth or young people in care. And under the legislation that oversees social workers and the child welfare system, it's called Section 70, and that piece of legislation is in the Child, Family, and Community Services Act. Generally, there are 14, sorry, next slide. There are 14 Section 70 rights, but we break them down into the right to be safe, the right to express your ideas and opinions to the adults and have them considered and listened to be included in developing plans that impact you and have a say in the decisions that will guide your life. Understand how these decisions have been made, even if you don't agree with them. So we often will say to young people, you have a right to have your say, not necessarily get your way. But the other point is that one of your Section 70 rights as a young person in care of the Ministry of Child and Family Development, which is commonly referred to as MCFD, are that you have the right to contact the representative for children and youth when you disagree with the decision or even to ask about what your rights are as a young person. Next slide, I think. I would say, sorry, actually, can you go back, Sophia? My bad. I would say generally these rights are not to be taken away without having some understanding as to why. So often to be safe means that you also follow some of the responsibilities of maintaining your safety. So with those rights comes responsibilities. For example, your right to be safe means that you should take some basic safety precautions such as wearing your seatbelt in the car or a helmet when you're biking. Also, your responsibility, one of your rights is to have access to education. So your responsibility is that you attend school and that you, access the education available to you and you ask questions if you're not understanding something. So as you get older, sometimes your responsibilities also increase. So the older you get, the more responsibility you have to also protect your rights. And then at 19, when you're an adult, you also have rights, but those are found in other documents. One final thing would be to say that no one enjoys all their rights at the same time. So the individual gets to choose which right they're exercising in a particular circumstance. So clearly you don't have, you can't have your right to play, which is one of your rights as a child, at the same time as your right to rest. So the individual chooses when they're going to play versus rest. All right, so practical tips for effective self-advocacy. We've tried to break this down into sort of 3 steps for people to make it clear. So the first one would be to learn. which is learning not just about what impacts went into this decision or what factors went into making a decision, but also what rights you have in this particular circumstance. So it's also about clarifying what your concern is. And often with young people who may call our office, they may say they don't know exactly what's going on, they just know that something doesn't feel right. So we would review with them what rights they have, and sometimes that can identify where their issue is because one of their rights is being violated. After sort of gathering some information and learning about exactly what it is that is the problem or the issue, it's about getting ready. So what do we need to communicate effectively? Who are the decision makers we need to be in contact with? What resources do we have to support our voice being heard, and what processes are involved? So that can also be what complaint processes do we have available to us, and those types of things. And then last is go. So it's actually some effective communication skills about meeting and about being heard and increasing your chances of being heard by the decision makers. So we have a bit of a scenario.
Jordan is 14 years old and has been told by their social worker that they will be moving to another foster home in a week. Jordan has not been told why and has not had an opportunity to share their wishes around planning. Jordan has lived in this home for 5 years and does not want to move. So Learn is about gathering information and really understanding what the issue is, how you feel about it, and what you want to happen. It starts with asking questions. So to start asking questions, we'll start with the 5 W's. So who made the decision? Who is impacted? Who can help? Who has the power to either change the decision to move Jordan or change how or when the move happens? So in this scenario, a move may not just impact Jordan's home environment, but also what school they attend and or their ability to participate in clubs or extracurricular activities. It likely also impacts others, such as Jordan's family and friends or other young people in the home. Social workers have bosses called team leaders. If you disagree with the decision a social worker has made, you can ask to speak with a team leader. So the next one is what? So what reasons were given for why a move needs to happen? What factors were considered in making a decision? What does Jordan need or want right now? What rights were violated? Often decisions are made which will meet the needs of many, but not all people. If you know how a decision was made, such as what factors were considered, this will help you point out how those factors may or may not have considered you and your life. Likely the social worker has made the decision for a reason, but clearly it was not shared with Jordan. It is one of Jordan's rights to know why a decision was made and for them to have their input. In this scenario, maybe the move makes sense, but perhaps it's so close to the end of the school year that Jordan wants to wait until school ends before moving. So the next one is when. If Jordan is looking for the decision to be reconsidered or something to be done, Jordan can ask when they can expect those actions to take place. And then the next one is why. So if Jordan knows why the decision was made, they can focus on what impact the decision is having on them and not what impact it intended to have. MCFD has both law and policy, which guides how they make decisions. These documents say what a social worker has to do to consider when moving a young person, including what is in their best interest.
So thank you, Nicole. That's very well laid out. So the next step is about getting ready. So once you've clarified for Jordan who are the people that are impacted by this decision, when can could the decision be changed in any way? Who needs to hear Jordan's points of view on why they don't want to move or what their feelings are about the move? Then it's deciding how to best express yourself. And often we talk about getting ready is thinking about your communication skills and how do you feel most confident. So for example, if you're feeling confident in having a conversation and that's something you feel comfortable doing with the social worker, Jordan could call her social worker and have a conversation first to talk about, getting some of those answers. But if you're not feeling so confident in person, because it can be sometimes daunting, often young people feel that their social worker has power over them, and so it requires some support. So if it's not in person, then sometimes it's on the phone, and that gives you an opportunity to sort of write down what you want to say ahead of time without feeling sort of under pressure, gives you an opportunity to be heard, but only by one person. And that person may not be the decision maker. So the social worker, as I said, often makes a decision with several other people involved. So it may also be needing to think about having a meeting. Often in meetings, young people can feel overwhelmed if there's more than one person. So we often suggest to young people to think about how do they want to be heard. And if it's not verbally, sometimes it could be writing a letter or sharing a picture that's important, or a song with lyrics that mean something to you, or there's many ways of communicating. So telling a story. Often with these less direct forms of communication and voicing your opinion, it does require some interpretation, or at least to somebody to support you if there's lots of questions about what you're trying to communicate. So I often say it's great to have an ally who you've already sort of maybe run through some of these scenarios with. They've been able to ask you questions about why you're bringing in this picture or telling this story, so that if others need clarification, they're there to help support you. It's often an important piece to prepare beforehand. So we suggest to young people about thinking if they start to get elevated or agitated because either they're feeling not heard, or people are asking them questions that maybe they assumed they should have the answers to. We like to remind people that nobody can be a mind reader, and communication is really important in clarifying, which requires answering questions. You should know that in very large systems, the reasons provided for a decision being made may not have considered the individual. Therefore, that's why we suggest sharing how a decision has impacted you, and not just in the, for Jordan's situation, it could be, I just don't want to move. Okay, well, why is that? Well, it is impacting my contact with my family and friends. It is impacting my school progress. It is impacting other areas of my life. So it's good to be clear on the impact the decision is having rather than the intent. When you go to a meeting, often people will suggest to you that their intent was maybe you be closer to school. However, the impact could be that, in fact, it's disruptive to many other areas of your life. So we often will suggest to young people to write down a bit of a story and a timeline as to, how this impact how the decision is having an impact. It's also really important to know that any decision being made, you do have a right to be communicated to you in a way that you understand. So that's not just about language, but it could also be, and I don't mean language by like an alternate language, I mean simple language, so youth-friendly language. When somebody says, well, we think it's in your best interests, you need to explain what does best interests include. Or we're following this policy, which means we have to reunite you with somebody like a sibling. However, you may have a different take on what your best interests include. and they wouldn't know that unless you shared it with them. So any disagreement you have or any decision you have that you disagree with, there will be a complaint process. Within MCFD, there is complaints, but there's also opportunities prior to filing a formal complaint to try and resolve some situations. And that usually starts with a conversation with your social worker. Next slide. So the last piece is sort of about being at the meeting or being at in the forum that you've chosen to present your views. And we always suggest bringing your support. This really requires some good communication skills. So we always remind people that advocacy, you catch more flies with honey than you do with vinegar. Being heard is also about communicating effectively. Advocacy is about assertive, collaborative communication. It's not about the loudest voice in the room or the person who has the most to say. So it also requires listening. If you start name calling or interrupting people, that often means people shut down and they stop listening, and they don't take seriously what you have to say. So it's important to keep calm, ask for breaks if things are getting heated for you, and listen to the responses when you raise like if you ask a question, you need to also listen to the response and not assume you know what the answer is going to be. We do have some very effective sort of tips and tools that you can access from calling our intake line, and those might be checklists before attending a meeting, scripts for leaving a voice message. These very sort of standard pieces can be helpful when you're emotional and when it's hard to keep track of sometimes what's being shared back with you. Sorry. I often will share with young people that if they can't clearly articulate the issue that they're having, it may be helpful to have somebody else speak for them in a meeting, even if they're present. So being in the meeting means you get to sit and listen. It doesn't mean you have to share. We often encourage people to participate in the meetings that are held about them, as it's very clear that often if they don't, information that they should have, they don't have. But you have every right to ask for those things in writing, as well as like meeting minutes and if you wanted to get a list of what your rights are, those should be provided to you. So sometimes if we can't do everything verbally, it's good to have things written down. And after anytime there's a meeting, it's likely things might not be resolved in that immediate meeting. It may take some other people to have input. So it's really important to ask for a follow-up and a timeline. So before a meeting ends, I often will say, are there any action items people needed to follow up on? And when are we meeting next? Or when can I expect to hear from you back? I think very often young people walk away and then they're not sure what the next step is. So it's really good to have that next step prior to moving on.
So if you are in a situation where you think an RCY advocate can help, we might be able to. Here's just some of the things that we are able to do. So we can request reasons or reconsiderations on a decision or a plan. We can review planning and decisions, and that just means that we're going to look at planning and see at what points was your views asked for, or were they heard or considered, and making sure that your rights are respected. We could work with families and other advocates to provide information, assistance, advice, coaching, and support. We can also empower self-advocacy. So part of that is coaching you to advocate for yourself and encourage you to meaningfully participate. And we can also encourage timeliness in planning and decision making. So sometimes the process gets stalled, so an advocate could help get it unstuck and keep it moving. What advocates can't do is they can't reverse decisions made by MCFD, so they're not decision makers. We could ask for a reconsideration and for reasons, but we can't say, hey, you need to not do this and do something different. We're not case managers, and often our role is very short term. So if you have a concern, you call our office. We help you through those concerns, but we're not case managers. So after the concern has been resolved, you would need to work with your social worker moving forward from that. And if another situation comes up, you can always call our office again. We don't represent children in court or influence legal decisions made about them. We don't get involved in custody or access matters. So anything that regarding family law, we don't have influence over that. And we don't provide child protection services. If you're not sure if we can help, you can contact us anyways. If we can't provide direct advocacy services, we could always provide referrals or resources to you to follow up with. So we'll always have something to help you out. If not direct advocacy services, we can find other organizations that can help you out.
Sorry, Sophia.
Yeah.
Bronwyn. Can I just add something about advocacy? I just wanted to note that it's important to know that anybody who calls our office can remain anonymous. So it doesn't require you to identify, yourself, but we don't do child protection, as Sophia said. But any young person who calls, if they just wanted to get some information and ask some questions, that's fine. You can do that without having to have an advocate assigned. But the other piece is, once an advocate is assigned, you do have the right to private and confidential conversations with that person, which means they cannot share anything you share with them without consent. There are two exceptions to that that we obviously need to explain for people under the age of 19, is that if somebody shares with us a concern that a young person is being harmed, then we must, by an adult, we must report that. Often we would not do so behind somebody's back, but rather say, I'm actually quite concerned. What next steps can I help you take, because this is a protection concern or a safety concern. So there are those two caveats if they were to share that they might harm themselves. So for the only profession in the lower or in BC that it does not have that reporting requirement are lawyers, but all other adults in British Columbia must report a concern if they are aware a child is being harmed. So I just wanted to point that out. So if people want to remain anonymous when they call our office, they can, as well as if you had an advocate assigned, everything is confidential unless you consent to us doing something or sharing information. Thanks.
To get in touch with us, you can call, text, or email, and we'll provide the details for those towards the end. When you call our 1-800 toll-free number, an intake coordinator will answer the phone. Tell them how old you are and a general sense of what you want to talk about. For example, you can say, I'm 16 and having issues with my group home. The intake coordinator will transfer you directly to an advocate. Then the next step would be that the intake advocate will ask you some questions about your problem. Then they will get a better sense of the issues that you're facing and explore ways that they can help. For concerns that we can't help with, like family law issues such as divorce, they'll provide resources for you to follow up with. The concern might be bigger or more complex, and when that happens, an advocate will be involved. If you are emailing us, our intake advocate will call you back, and if you decide to reach us via chat on our website, you will also be speaking directly with an intake advocate. For chat, if your concern is complex or if they have lots of questions that they want to ask you, an intake advocate may ask to continue the conversation over the phone.
So the Foundry had sent us some questions for our advocates to answer. So the first one is a social worker picked me up and took me to a group home, and now I'm not allowed to go to my mother's house. What can I do to have visits with mom?
Yep, and this is a very common situation. So as a young person who has just maybe started in the child welfare system, they should be informed about what their Section 70 rights are. In Section 70, it does state you have a right to meet with your family without supervision unless it is unsafe. So if the social worker has deemed that it's unsafe to have a visit with mom, then your other option is to have what they call a supervised or supported visit, which means there would be another adult who's deemed safe to supervise while you have contact with your mom. Now, if there isn't a safety concern, then you have the right to have contact without an additional adult or person. This could be a situation in which all they may need to do is speak to you as they've received a report, and they need to interview you separate from where your mom is. So in this case, it would be really good to ask the social worker, when's the next time I'm going to see my mom? When can I expect to speak to my mom? It may not be that you can see her right away, but that you should always be able to speak to them. If there was any concerns that came out of visitation or speaking on the phone, those would need to be discussed with you. So if maybe something happened during a visit or on a phone call, and a social worker or somebody else had concerns that maybe mom was saying something inappropriate or telling you to run away or do something unsafe, then that also needs to be shared with you as to the reason as to why there's now supervised or supported access. And then the very, very least, you should have a time in which you can reevaluate the decision. So if they say mom's not safe right now, we need to interview you separate from mom, and that's going to take 2 weeks, then you need to be given an opportunity after the 2 weeks to ask again for that contact. So this is an example of really important for people to know what their Section 70 rights are, and that you don't have to prove that it's safe to be with mom. In fact, they need to prove that it's not safe first.
So the second question is, my social worker said I would transition home in a year. Now it's been 2 years and there's been no plan to help me get back home. How can an advocate help?
So again, this goes back to a Section 70 right for this young person. If there was a plan, that's often what they document in something called a plan of care or a care plan, and that should cover many different areas of your life. As a young person in care with a social worker as your guardian, they need to be doing review of that plan every 6 months. And often it's discussed at something called ICM, or Integrated Case Management meetings. So those are meetings that are usually held between the professionals. So that could include your social worker, it might include your parent, it might include the people you're living with, whether that be a family member or a foster parent or in a group home. So often there's these meetings, and it's really important if you have any questions to attend those meetings. It's not required to. You're often asked, and many young people choose not to because it's a bit overwhelming, but you can even go for part of it if you don't want to go for all of it. So it's important to ask, where's that plan? If it's been 2 years, hopefully somebody would have updated you as to what's going on, because it could be maybe the parents looking for appropriate housing, and right now that's being delayed. We've had a lot of plans delayed with COVID, so it's really important to ask the question. And then when you have a response, if you don't agree with that response, like, oh, I forgot, or yeah, things have changed, and so it's just taking extra time, you can call our office for help. You should always be allowed to have access to your care plan if you want to see it. So it is a document that you can look at and have your input into. And the other piece is attending meetings. And if you can't go for all of it, you can ask for somebody else to go for part of it.
And the last question, in my group home, I've been bullied by another resident, but the staff won't listen to me. What can I do?
Also another great question. We would start with some questions. So who's bullying you? Who have you spoken to? If you've only spoken to one staff person, have they shared it with the other staff so the other staff are aware? If you have spoken to many staff and and you feel like it's still going on, then maybe it's asking to speak to the manager or the program coordinator of the house. And then the very least, if that still is not working, your social worker as your guardian should be part of your advocacy to get that resolved. So it may have to do with putting in more support in the home. It may have to do with if you're asking for a change in placement. So often, where you're living is referred to as a placement or a resource. So if you're being bullied there and you don't feel safe, one of your rights is to feel safe in the home that you live in, as well as to understand what the expectations of your behavior are and the consequences of those behaviors. So your Section 70 rights includes being told what behaviors you're expected to have and what the consequences of not having those behaviors are. And then it could also be, involving the other resident and having a conversation about, is this the best place for both of you? So there is also somebody else who we in the RCY's office would include, and that's something called a resource social worker. So your social worker is your legal guardian. There is often a social worker also attached to the place that you're living in. So sometimes you can ask to have your social worker speak to the resource social worker as part of resolving that conflict or that concern.
So that wraps up our presentation for today. If you'd like to get in touch with us, you can call us toll-free at 1-800-476-3933. You can also email us at rcy@rcybc.ca, or you can text us at www.rcybc.ca. And we're open from Monday to Friday from 8:30 till 4:30. Thank you so much to Anne, Paige, and RJ from Foundry for hosting, and for all of you for attending our presentation. We hope you found this information helpful. If you have other questions or would like to talk about a concern that's specific to you or someone that you're advocating for, give us a call and we can help. Additionally, if you'd like to follow up about this presentation, all three of us can be reached at that phone number as well. Thank you so much for attending, and we'll hope to see you guys soon.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much to our presenters today. And we will be recording this webinar, and it will live on the Foundry website in the next coming weeks. Once we've wrapped up the rest of our series, we will upload all of the wonderful presentations that we've had to our website. So thank you so much for coming today. We hope to see you next Monday at 4 p.m. for our next installment of the advocacy series. And thank you very much. Bye.